So, of more breaking updates about the Middle East crisis. It's really unfortunate, but the situation is breaking down even further with no resolution in sight. We are fighting that could escalate at any moment. Biden is asking for $100 billion and oil prices are just waiting to explode. But now we have major superpowers disagreeing with each other. We are seeing a battle of diplomacy going on today. It's between Russia and China versus the US. Both sides wants the world to back their version of peace for the Middle East. And whoever wins, they are going to shape the future of the world order, especially with the Middle East. In our lead story today, Russia and China vetoed the US-backed resolution on Gaza at the United Nations. This is big news because it shows America is trying to push their agenda of a humanitarian pause instead of a ceasefire, which is what the majority wants. The resolution was defeated when Russia, China, and the UAE voted against the measure. Remember that out of the UN Security Council members, the UAE is the only Arab country on the list. So the UAE slapping away America's plan is a very big deal. It's essentially a big thumbs down from the Arab world. And let's dig deeper into the details because on the surface, it seems like Russia and China have lost their minds, right? Why veto a bill that calls for reprieve? And to better understand, let's listen to what China's UN ambassador has to say. The draft does not reflect the world's strongest calls for ceasefire and end to the fighting, and it does not help resolve the issue. In other words, America's resolution is only calling for a pause to the conflict. It is not a ceasefire that the majority of the world truly wants. And let me bring you back to the previous resolution that the United States struck down. 12 nations wanted a ceasefire, while America doesn't want that. America is willing to back humanitarian pauses to let aid in, but not a full ceasefire. And there's a huge difference between the two that we must appreciate. It is not just semantics. A pause is informal, and it's much shorter than a ceasefire. A pause could last weeks, days, or even mere hours. That's why China, Russia, and the UAE struck down the proposal. It just doesn't make lasting sense. Approving it means they're implicitly accepting America's plan of a potentially longer conflict. And if you think the ground battle or economic battle is important, this diplomacy fight is even more crucial. The world is essentially trying to convince the United States to accept a ceasefire. And we are seeing the UN in total chaos, right? Unless this gets resolved and the world comes to an agreement, the fuse has been lit for the Middle East. It's just a matter of time before something happens that leads to further escalation. And here's how messy things are. Israel and the UN Secretary General are locked in an intense argument. Israel is even calling for him to resign. So things within the world's top body are dysfunctional for now, it's undeniable. China and Russia wants to push their ceasefire plan out, but America wants a pause instead. And let's analyze this from both the American and China-Russia perspectives. It's important to understand what each side really desires, right? What are their end goals? Israel is a long-standing ally of the United States. It has been that way for decades and it's probably not going to change. Since 1945, there have been around 36 draft resolutions related to Israel and Palestine. What's surprising is that 34 of them were vetoed by the United States themselves. So we can expect America to continue supporting Israel, not just financially or on the ground, but in the UN as well. I'm not saying it is right, I'm not saying it is wrong, but this is a situation we are in. The US wants Israel to come out on top to solidify their influence in the Middle East, so it's quite straightforward here. China and Russia are taking the exact opposite approach of the US. If they manage to get the world to adopt their resolution of a ceasefire, it is a big win for them. And there's a good reason why Putin is pushing for ceasefire and talks across all sides. Eventually, the Ukraine conflict is going to end, and a sort of peace deal or ceasefire is going to be worked out as well. If Russia scores a win in the Middle East with their peace plan or ceasefire, this helps them to further their agenda when the time comes. The Ukraine conflict will probably end at the negotiating table with the UN. Sure, having peace in the Middle East is great, but Russia's motive probably extends towards their conflict with Ukraine as well. Let's not forget that. And how about China? What do they want? China's agenda is probably much simpler than both of them, right? And it revolves around building their economy. It's about framing themselves as peace brokers, building their influence further in the Middle East. And if they do that, they'll reap enormous dividends that revolve around their economic power. A diplomatic win here can translate into tangible benefits. For example, China will be able to convince more Arab states to do bilateral trade using their local currency. Eventually, the oil for yuan will become a reality. They'll also be able to push out their Belt Road plan further in the Middle East. Now, let's just think about this, right? If China manages to broker peace, do you think the G7 trade corridor plan will be adopted or China's BRI? So the stakes are extremely high for all sides, and this is why America and China Russia will keep striking each other's resolution down. It's essentially a diplomatic war, but the advantage might swing to China very soon. Beijing is going to assume the presidency of the UN Security Council in November, and this allows them to set the agenda and have a much bigger voice on the world stage. So something may get worked out in November, right? But I wouldn't bet everything on this as well. However, the situation on the ground is progressively getting worse, and let's operate on the assumption that there won't be a ceasefire anytime soon. How bad can things spiral down? And it's important to take an objective look because this affects the oil price and the money that will be poured into the conflict. Well, President Biden has warned Iran again. He has given them a red line. He's warning of a response if Iran takes action on US troops. Listen to this. My warning to the Ayatollah was that if they continue to move against those troops, we will respond. Now, this is a direct message that's unambiguous. America has two carrier strike groups in the region. So, yes, they have the firepower to make things happen. And to add fuel to the fire, Iran is doing some verbal escalations of their own. At the United Nations, Iran is warning that the US won't be spared if Israel's retaliation continues. Whether this is pure blustering or genuine threat, I have no idea. But there's a reason why Israel has not gone in yet. There are reports that the US is moving to deter Iran ahead of the ground offensive. They are moving defense systems into their region just in case something really happens. And this is important because you don't do such a thing unless the threat is somewhat genuine, somewhat credible. America has a ton of troops based in the Middle East, and according to various estimates, back in 2020, there are thousands of boots on the ground across the region. There are 2,000 in Saudi Arabia, 13,000 in Kuwait, 8,000 in Qatar, and over 3,000 in the UAE. And this makes the entire region very volatile. Will Iran take action and where? Those are the big questions. And the bulk of US presence centers around the big oil producing countries, right? No surprise there. And what if chaos breaks out over there? Just imagine the insanity that will be unleashed on the oil markets. If the oil fields, refineries, or even the Strait of Hormuz gets compromised, we are talking about $100 oil easily 110, 120. And that's going to be a second inflation crisis in 2 years. So what you're paying at the pump, guys, will be going up. Now, sure, nothing has happened yet, right? But what we have is probably just a reprieve. It's just the calm before the storm. Netanyahu says that Israel is still preparing to go in. He has not been called off. We don't know the time, we don't know the date, but once it happens, it might just shock the entire energy markets up. And this is where we need to talk about oil for a bit. The global economy is controlled by two things, right? The price of oil and interest rates. And between the two, oil is more important because it affects how interest rates are set as well. Since the chaos happened on October the 7th, oil prices have been extremely volatile. It was below $84 to start and then went well above $92 before settling down at 88. And this is just within a span of 20 days. I have no idea what the price of oil will be a week from now, let alone what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Everything is on a powder cake waiting to ignite. But I'm quite sure that the market is not factoring in the true risk of this crisis into the oil price yet. With experts saying that OPEC will step in to save the day, Saudi Arabia and France do a don Superman cape and increase production. According to the IEA, one possible option is Saudi Arabia and Russia would change their production policies. They are hoping for OPEC Plus to pump more oil. Apparently, OPEC has over 4 million barrels a day of spare capacity that can be unleashed into the markets. Now, if that happens, yes, oil prices will come down. OPEC meets again in November, and a miracle could happen. They might actually increase production. And this is where we need to sit back and really think about it. How likely will OPEC ramp up their production? The EIA is forecasting OPEC's output to crash even further in 2024 from almost 40 million barrels a day down below 38 million barrels a day, and there's a reason why. It's a very fundamental reason. Oil demand is inelastic. Remember this phrase. Just because you cut production down by 1 million barrels or 2 million barrels doesn't mean the world scales back their consumption by exactly 2 million barrels instantly. It doesn't work this way. Sure, if the economy collapses, oil demand will go down. Till that happens, people will still need to buy oil at a market price. There isn't much choice. Businesses still need electricity to operate. People still need to heat their homes, especially when winter is coming. So when OPEC cuts production, they are earning far more per barrel even if the demand drops slightly. It's all pure economics. There's no grand conspiracy here. OPEC is defending their revenues because they know a recession is coming. Then we need to look at the situation on the ground. If the main supply choke point in the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked, no amount of OPEC oil pumped out will make a difference. Just in the first 9 months this year, over 20 million barrels passed through the strait, and that's around 20% of global consumption. OPEC relies on this route, and if the unthinkable happens, no amount of production increase will matter. Even if they pump out 100 million barrels, it doesn't matter if you can't get the oil out. You simply can't transport it out. And I want to end this off by talking a little about Biden's $100 billion request. I think we are one step closer to getting approval because Congress has now appointed a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Mainstream media is calling him a Trump ally, and he isn't exactly on great terms with President Biden. But fighting Russia and supporting Israel is something that still has strong bipartisan support. He has called the aid package a top priority and gave a statement to reporters. We'll be talking about the support and what's necessary to get it. We have to ensure that Putin is not successful, and I think all the House Republicans are united in that cause. And I think it's quite clear what's going to happen, right? Biden will get the money for Israel and Ukraine. He might even get the full amount, and out of which over $75 billion will go to their allies. So, what does this mean for you and me? Well, bond yields will stay high and likely head up even higher. The treasury collapse isn't done yet. Borrowing costs across the board isn't going to come down. And if you stack this pressure together with a high oil price from an escalation, there's no escaping a recession. Not even Neo from the Matrix can dodge this one. Everything now depends on the Middle East crisis and how it plays out. We have a combination of military, economic, and diplomatic storms all converging together, and it is not looking good. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will things continue to escalate? Can the UN solve this crisis? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.